Block A in the Meteor quilt is a framed 4-patch.
Welcome back to the Meteor Quilt Along. It's time to start sewing. We're going to keep it easy this week with our 4 patches and rectangle blocks.
But you might be saying, I'm not doing the Meteor Quilt Along. Well, stay tuned because I have some great ideas about how to use the framed 4-patch in other layouts as well.
This block uses just 2 sizes of pieces. You have the smaller squares for the 4-patch and the rectangles that frame the center unit. These will be attached with partial seams. That way you are cutting 1 size rectangle to go around your 1 size of square. Start by sewing your 4-patch units and pressing to the darker fabric. With your 2-patch units together, lay them right sides together and you can nest that seam to finish your 4-patch. I like to spin my seams when I am using a 4-patch, so I've pressed to the dark and I want this block to continue spinning around so that the seam always faces up on that left-hand side. So I am going to lay that open, and the fun with spinning your seams is that you have a cute little 4-patch there right in the center. So I finger press that. I can see that these 2 seams are going towards the yellow fabric, so I can finger press those from the front as I put the rest of the block together. To begin our partial seams, we are going to have our 4-patch center with 1 rectangle. And when I match that up in the corner, I am only going to sew part way down this side. So I'm going to start here and sew across to just past this seam. And then this will be loose. I'm going to attach the other sides, and then because I need this, I don't want this portion sewn down because it will be harder to add the fabric on this other side of the 4-patch. So that's why we want a partial seam on the first side of our 4-patch. So you can see my partial seam only goes part way. I'm going to finger press towards the border rectangles. And my next rectangle will add on the full side. So I'm not worried about this open seam until the very end. I am going to continue adding full rectangles. So when I lay them right sides together, I'm actually going to flip this over and sew with the 4-patch on top. That way I can look and make sure my seams are going the right direction under the needle. Again, finger press to the rectangle, add your 3rd piece on the full length, right sides together, and then under the needle with the 4-patch on top. We have almost finished our 4-patch. You can see this 4th piece of fabric needs to fit in right here, but we need to get this first one out of the way. So if it helps, go ahead and put a pin in that fabric so that it is well out of the way of your sewing. And we are going to flip that over so that our 4-patch is under the needle first, and you can see that fabric is well out of the way of our seam. That 4th side is complete, and then I come back to the unfinished seam from the first side. You can see that we put those right sides together. They'll line up just right after some finger pressing. And again, I can feed this with the 4-patch facing up. I can start just a couple stitches on top of my previous seam and finish the stitching on that side of the block. And there we have our finished block ready for pressing. Again, we use a partial seam that lets us cut 4 of the same rectangle to piece around our center 4-patch for the Meteor quilt. The Meteor quilt has 4 patches in the center of all the blocks, but I want to caution you, do not sew all the 4 patches together right away. Block A has a 4-patch pieced center. Blocks B, C, D, and E all use a different technique that puts the 4-patch together at the end. So do not sew any more 4 patches. We'll get to the next block in just a minute. The other way to piece the framed 4-patch is a layout called Courthouse Steps. And this is a variation of the log cabin block. And I think this would be a lot of fun as an I Spy quilt, where you put the pattern fabrics for the I Spy search in the borders, and then the center 4-patch can be fun colors, the child's favorite color, the nursery colors, coordinating with the fabric, as I've done here with these reds and purples. So for the Courthouse Steps layout, you have 2 different size rectangles, and that was not the look that I wanted for the Meteor quilt. I wanted bigger chunks of fabric, so I used the partial seam in the Meteor quilt. But I wanted to show you this variation of the framed 4-patch. So we will use 2 smaller rectangles that are the same size as your 4-patch unit, and then you use 2 longer rectangles for the finished size of your block. So again, we will start with the 4-patch and spin the seam in the middle. With the 4-patch unit, I can add short rectangles to opposite sides. And once the short sides are sewn on, we can add the 2 longer pieces. And there is our framed 4-patch using the Courthouse Steps construction unit with 2 smaller rectangles. The Meteor block uses 4 of the same size rectangle and a partial seam. Fun variations for the framed 4-patch block. Block B is a pinwheel that I sew together in quadrants. That's why I did not want you to sew the 4 patches for the entire Meteor quilt, because we're going to sew the squares for the 4-patch to our rectangle, which forms the pinwheel blade in our accent color, and then we'll put it with the white background rectangle. And we'll make all of our quadrants, and then we'll turn 4 of them so that they form a pinwheel. I sew my blocks with the smaller piece on top, so I'll just line up my small square on top of my accent rectangle and sew the short side. Press these units towards the accent rectangle. Add the background rectangle to the left-hand side of your pinwheel. For these blocks is I will put the smaller unit on top and sew that. I am finger pressing everything to the background rectangle just because I don't like to get up and iron. I will wait until I have the blocks all done, and that also cuts down on some of the distortion of your fabric that may happen when you press. Laying out the pinwheel block, the first section I typically put in the upper left corner, and then I know my square has to rotate 90 degrees. and I am forming that 4-patch in the center. So I'm going to rotate and make sure that my colored squares are opposite from each other, and then I can sew my pairs together and one final seam for the block. Because I pressed towards the accent rectangle, I have a bulkier seam here, so I may remember for future units to press those accent rectangles towards the 4-patch, and that way when you press the other unit, the longer piece, to the background, you can nest those seams. But for right now, I'll just give that a really good press and not worry about it too much. Occasionally you do get seams going in the same direction that will not nest, and it's not a huge game changer. I am pressing towards the background fabric, so I know that unit goes that direction. Same thing here, when you lay your pieces the same orientation and then spin them around to make the 4-patch in the center, and I will match that seam. Now I've got seams going in the opposite direction, so that will nest nicely in the center. And here we have our block B, the basic pinwheel for our Meteor quilt. The framed 4-patch and basic pinwheel blocks work so well together. Simply alternate the blocks using warm fall colors to make a cozy throw-size quilt. Would you like to hear more about how I selected the colors for the Meteor quilt? Head over to this video where I introduce the quilt along and plan my color scheme. You can download your own copy of the pattern at truebluequilts.com. Full information is in the video description below. In our next video, we will start piecing half rectangle triangles with the angle play templates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.